Welcome to another edition of Ian Cameron's Football Frenzy. It is already week 10 in the Canadian Football League, if you can believe it. The season always seems to fly by extremely fast, and it is doing so once again. 4 games on tap. Of course, we've got about another, I would say, month of this Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday night standalone game schedule that the CFL rolls out each week. That goes by the wayside when the NFL returns next month, where the CFL will go basically to Friday and Saturday double headers for the rest of the season. They want no part of Thursday night football. They want no part of, obviously, anything on Sunday against the NFL. So once NFL starts, we'll have 2 Friday games and 2 Saturday games pretty much every week in the CFL. It is long overdue to have the man you see on the screen next to me back here on Ian Cameron's Football Frenzy, and fresh off a recent vacation. So he's rested, ready for the rest of the CFL season, and of course NFL and college football as well right around the corner. Rob Vino back with me here on Ian Cameron's Football Frenzy. Rob, good to have you back on the show. How are things?
Things are good, Ian. I appreciate the invite. Glad to be back with you. Like you say, we get a limited amount of time here where we can, goof off, so to speak. Maybe, it's funny. My kids used to ask me when they were little, do you ever get a day off? And I thought about it, and I was like, yeah, actually the All-Star break the day before and the day after is kind of no sports going on. But we do try and take a little bit of time and then get ready for this big push for football, which seems like it got upon us real quick. And all of a sudden we're going to have college football, NFL football for real. We already have preseason before we can speak. But in the meantime, the CFL, like you said, we were talking off air, some Olympic chatter where we can get involved. So it's a good time. I'm not complaining.
Shout out to our buddy, Gabe Morency, a heck of a guy, him and Cam Stewart, friends of mine, probably now for over 15 years I've known them and been friends with them. In fact, I was hanging with Cam Stewart for a Ticats game just a few weeks ago. He came down to Hamilton and ended up for a BC Hamilton game. Of course, for the home team, it was a terrible game for the Hamilton Ticats, but the whole season's been mostly terrible for my Ticats. But nevertheless, it was fun seeing Cam. And of course, I'm on the air with Cam and Gabe every Wednesday night, and I know you're with them on Friday nights. It's always a blast. And I'll just say this before we get into the football. I give Morency credit. He has handicapped and researched archery, water polo, volleyball, the breakdancing, I'm sure that's coming up. He's going to have some opinions on it with the Olympics, track and field. You go on down the list, diving. It's just incredible. All the handball, which I love. I've watched a lot of that handball. It's actually a pretty fun sport. I mean, Gabe Morency's been on top of this. He's been giving out picks on Twitter X throughout the Olympics and pretty much every event that's taking place. And I've tailed a bunch of them, and quite honestly, he's done pretty well. I mean, I've won a lot of these bets that he's recommended. So shout out to Gabe Morency. I don't know how he does it, but he's been handicapping these Olympics morning, noon, and night.
Yeah, there's no question, Ian. Same thing. I'll send you a DM, Rob, with these Olympic bets that I have, and all of a sudden you see, like I was saying to you off air, Netherlands women's field hockey. I would never get involved in that, but you know what? The recommendation is good. His recommendations have been good. So it keeps me interested during the day. The 6-hour time difference from me in the Eastern time zone is a little rough. Obviously, if you're not up at 5 a.m., you're missing stuff. So I've had to, it's like when we had those KBO days, Ian, when you had to wake up and watch the KBO at 4:30, 5 o'clock. But well worth it if you can cash tickets, right?
Absolutely. There's no question about that. Let's get into some CFL. And as we always do, before we get into the 4 games, we have a segment where we talk about the team that is on the bye week this week. And that team this week is the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. They are the one team that is not in action here in week 10. And prior to last week, the season looked like it was starting to slip away for the Bombers, and an offense that hasn't performed as well, an aging older offensive line that really hasn't held up this year for Zach Collaros or the Brady Oliveira-led run game as well as they have in the past. In a defense that I think, especially early in the season, missing Jackson Jeffcoat, one of their dual pass rushers, and now teams are double-teaming Willie Jefferson all the time and really daring Winnipeg to get someone else to, get pressure on the quarterback on a routine basis. And then it was a very young secondary early in the season as well. But slowly but surely, even in the losses prior to last week, Winnipeg's defense was starting to play better. The Toronto game, they couldn't have done anything more defensively than they did. They shut down Cameron Dukes and the Argos offense, but it was just mistakes and turnovers and a very dubious coaching decision to not kick a field goal late in that game by Bombers head coach Mike O'Shea that cost them against the Argos in that overtime game. But another frustrating loss, another winnable game slips through their fingers. And then you think, wow, you're now in a dubious position with your record. You're going home facing a rested, very good BC Lions team coming off a bye week. And the result we saw last week, probably one of the more surprising ones for me of this entire CFL season. Not so much that Winnipeg won and covered, and they were a home underdog for a very rare occasion. I can tell you, as someone that's obviously watched and bet CFL for the last 20 years, 15 to 20 years, during this run of dominance for Winnipeg, 4 Grey Cup appearances and 4 straight West Division titles, I'm not sure they were a home underdog a single time, maybe once. But until last week against BC, and then all of a sudden as a home dog, they end up getting the big victory there against the BC Lions. And what was shocking was not just the win, it was shutting out this vaunted, prolific, explosive, big play VA, Vernon Adams-led BC Lions offense. It was an incredible defensive effort. The offensive line for BC got whipped. Vernon Adams took a pounding that led to him getting injured in that game. And Jake Dolagala had to take over at the quarterback spot for the BC Lions. He's already been named the starter Sunday against Edmonton. We'll get to that obviously later. And you look at now the BC offensive line, they've had some issues, even in the Calgary loss before that, in protect as well, either for Vernon Adams. And their offense looked a little out of sorts, out of sync there. But credit to Winnipeg. They got a huge win. And with the West Division outlook right now, suddenly they're 3-6 on the season. They're only now 1.5 games, I guess you could say, behind Calgary, who sit at third in the West at 4-4. And then BC and Saskatchewan have certainly come back down to earth recently. Saskatchewan's gone to 5-3. They've been a little bit shaky with Shea Patterson at quarterback instead of Trevor Harris. Obviously, there's a drop-off there, but it's been more a product, too, of the injuries and the defense kind of being susceptible at times for Saskatchewan. And then there's BC. What's happened? The offense all of a sudden couldn't be stopped. And the last 2 weeks, they've looked anything but that great vaunted BC offense we saw prior to the Calgary and the Winnipeg games. But just because we're talking Winnipeg, that was a huge win. And now you have the bye week. You're still very much alive now in the division because no one's running away with it. And you come out of the bye week and you're going to play that same BC Lions team again next week in Vancouver at BC Place Stadium, which I'm sure will be a spot that is circled for the BC Lions after the absolute ass-kicking they took against Winnipeg last week. But the question will be, will Vernon Adams be back for that game next week against Winnipeg? But I guess the question I have, and I don't know if even I have the answer, is Winnipeg back? Is Winnipeg ready to kind of look a lot more like the team we've seen dominate the West Division and the league for the last 4 years? Or do we need to see more than just that impressive 25-0 shutout over BC? Rob, where do you stand with Winnipeg here as they approach their bye week?
Well, I think, Ian, if we're going to look at things that need to be worked on, it's got to be producing touchdowns rather than field goals, right? They did score 7 times in the BC game, 6 were field goals. They've scored 40 times on offense this year, 12 touchdowns, 28 field goals. 70% of the time they're kicking field goals. That's all well and good, but I don't know that that's sustainable. The return or the addition of Lucky Whitehead to the receiving corps didn't pay great dividends, I wouldn't say, in the first game, but he did make a big catch in that contest for points. And with the bye week, get him more established into the offense. They could be better. Interesting, in these last 2 games that you talked about, how about some numbers for Winnipeg? Both were 400-plus total yard efforts by the Blue Bombers. And if you add up the total yardage margin in both of those games, they're plus 196 2 weeks ago. They're plus 337 against BC. That's 533 total yards more than their opponents in the last 2 weeks. So defensively, they look really good. The secondary is what I notice most. It's flying all over the place.
Evan Holmes is the guy to watch. He's been phenomenal. And I know Glenn Suiters talked about him a lot on the broadcast. He's been really good in that secondary, a young guy that stepped up, made plays, pass breakups, reading the cover, reading the quarterback. He's been really good.
Yeah, that's secondary, and of course, like you mentioned, you shut out BC. It's more than accomplishment. That team had 4 first downs. Vernon Adams led team 4 first downs in that contest, 2 of 15 on second down conversions. You can go right on down the list. I thought the Calgary game the week before was a low point for the BC offense, and it was. It was their worst offensive output of the season. Then to follow it up with this, I didn't see it coming. Maybe Winnipeg. Like I say, the one flaw I could find is let's score touchdowns instead of field goals. And if they start accomplishing that, Ian, I don't know that they won't be on the way back into the playoffs and scary for the rest of the league. So we'll see how it goes. Zach Caleros completed 81% of his passes last week. Obviously, they run the ball real well with Oliveira. And the defense, as we've mentioned multiple times now, has really, really played well.
It's played a lot better. There's no question. I think it's a combination, too, of that defense, playing better, the offensive struggles in the red zone. And there's been times, too, they've moved the ball well and they turn it over. They've had a lot of issues with turnovers. And it's, of course, when you move the ball and you take time off the clock and there's nothing to show for it, it also helps lead to what we've seen with Winnipeg from a totals perspective this year, the single strongest under team in the CFL, and it hasn't even been close. 8-1 to the under this season for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. The question is going to be, does that reverse itself a little bit? You think it has to at some point. They are going to play BC if Vernon's back and a bye week to work on the offensive struggles, and a BC team that just got shut out by Winnipeg, they're going to be focusing on, let's have a much better offensive game plan against Winnipeg this time around. I think situationally there might be a case for the over next week, maybe, because I think this is going to reverse itself at some point with Winnipeg. As far as they're not going to go 17-1 to the under this season in 18 games. That's just not going to happen. There's going to be spots, but I think that's what stands out about Winnipeg. 8-1 to the under. The defense has been better, and again, the offense, you're right, settling for field goals way too much if they're not turning the ball over, which has been a big issue for them as well. All right, let's get into Week 10. We will begin with Thursday night football. Saskatchewan Roughriders and the Ottawa Red Blacks. Early money all week on Ottawa. And I'll tell you right now, if you read the injury report on Saskatchewan this week, you know why. The money's come in on this Red Blacks team. 3-point home favorites, 48.5 the total. I mean, this is a bad injury report right now for the Saskatchewan Roughriders. And it actually just got worse with the final depth chart for this game being released a few hours ago. Depth charts always come out the day before the game is played. And for the Saskatchewan Roughriders, you look at who's out. They've got multiple key starting offensive linemen out. They were already without Philip Blake. They were already without Jacob Brammer. They were already without Jamarcus Hardrick, an all-star offensive lineman that they got in the offseason from Winnipeg. So if you're wondering why the O-line, which was so bad last year, early in the season when Saskatchewan got off to that undefeated start, looked better, Jamarcus Hardrick was a big part of it. Philip Blake was a big part of it. They're all out. That's 3 starters on the O-line that are missing for Saskatchewan in this game. And there's even more concerns, too, on the defense as far as injuries for the Saskatchewan Roughriders. They've got no Anthony Lanier. And that, to me, I am stunned there's not as many people talked about this last week in seeing Saskatchewan get absolutely run over by Javon Leake and the Edmonton Elks last week on that Saturday night game. People saying, well, what's happened to the Saskatchewan run defense, which has been so awesome this year? Well, there's 2 things. And everybody talked about how it was the Trey Ford inclusion that was a big part of it, because it's not so much that what Trey Ford can do. We know what he can do. He can throw the ball. He can run with the football extremely well, make plays when the pocket collapses. It's what his presence under center does for the Edmonton run game and how it affects how the Saskatchewan defense lines up. They got to keep a spy on the quarterback. You're not going to lose sight sometimes of the running back, in this case, Javon Leake, and it all of a sudden opened up all kinds of holes. I mean, there were a couple of runs by Edmonton in that game against Saskatchewan last week where Leake ran untouched right through the line of scrimmage, right past the defensive line, untouched, especially the second touchdown, the one he scored that was the kill shot that put it away late in the fourth quarter. And I'll tell you what, Anthony Lanier, for the first time this season, missed that game. He is maybe their best defensive lineman. He can get pressure on the quarterback, but more importantly, he's their best run stuffer. He is their best defender against the run by far. Anthony Lanier is a phenomenal player for Saskatchewan on that defensive front. He didn't play last week, and I think that is just as big of a reason for why Edmonton was able to have such success with a ground game that really didn't work at all prior to last week. Kevin Brown wasn't working. Even Javon Leake, when they've inserted him into that running back spot previous to last week, didn't do a whole lot. So the Anthony Lanier injury is significant to that Saskatchewan defense, and he's out again. He's on the 6-game injured list, so he's not going to be back anytime soon. So you put all these injuries to AJ Ouellette's out again, but I can live with that because he hasn't really performed like the big signing we thought he would be in the offseason, and that's a product of maybe Saskatchewan not run blocking as well. I think Frankie Hickson, who's taken his spot, has done a good enough job. That's a lot of injuries here for Saskatchewan. And they're traveling on a short week to Ottawa, going from Saturday night at home to Thursday night in Ottawa. And situationals and injuries combined, I mean, it's looking bleak here for Saskatchewan. So I did take Ottawa early in the week. You know, I was around minus 130 on the money line when I took it, and they were minus 1.5 or so at the time. This was like Monday afternoon. It's gone up to 3. If you haven't bet it yet, I'd be leery about Ottawa for one reason. Rolling going into the bye week. Blowout win against Calgary going into the bye week. Domination, and there's so much to like. The defense is better than it was last year. They finally got a quarterback that can throw the football in Drew Brown, the Oklahoma State and Hawaii product. He played parts of his college football career in both schools. He has been very, very good in throwing the football. He's been better than anything Ottawa's had at quarterback the last few years, whether it's Tyree Adams. Dustin Crum had a little nice success last year, but it was more with his legs, not necessarily with his arm. And you know I like Will Arndt, previous guest on the show, who was an Ottawa quarterback at one time, but you know he struggled there as well. Drew Brown's been good. And they've got weapons, too. Jalen Acklin, Dominique Rhymes, getting him from BC. Huge addition. Justin Hardy's been good in that receiving corps. So Ottawa's got weapons. Brown is playing at a very solid level. Wait till they get Raquel Armstead going running the football, the kid out of Temple, because I think there's potential for the run game here, especially with this Anthony Lanier absence. I think if you're targeting player props, look maybe at a Raquel Armstead over rushing yards, honestly. Because I think this Saskatchewan run defense, until they get Lanier back, I don't think it was just a product of Trey Ford and playing Edmonton last week. I think that was part of it, but I think Anthony Lanier's absence is huge in terms of their ability to stop the run because he's the best run defender they've got, and we saw without him last week how they were just gashed with the ground attack by the Edmonton Elks last week. So I think for Raquel Armstead, I don't bet a ton of player props, but that one stuck out to me right away that maybe it's an Armstead type of week here for the Ottawa Red Blacks. They get that run game going, even though they've been so good in the passing game lately with Drew Brown. So I thought Ottawa was a good bet at the opener. The concern with Ottawa is the teams off the bye this year have laid eggs at times. It's not been automatic that these teams off the bye week get it done. Look at BC. Perfect example last week against Winnipeg. I do worry about a little complacency setting in. Ottawa reading some press clippings. Nobody expected Ottawa to be 5-2, right behind Montreal in the East Division at this stage of the season. I'm worried maybe a little complacency sets in over the bye week, and because we've seen that, and that's the hesitancy now to get involved with Ottawa at -3. But I couldn't touch Saskatchewan this week. I just couldn't, with the short week and all the injuries that they have incurred going into this game. And keep in mind, too, Ottawa 4-0 at home this year, so a place that they could never win last year and 2 years ago. Suddenly, TD Place Stadium in Ottawa has been a nice little home field for the Red Blacks, undefeated in this on this field so far this season at 4-0. Rob, what do you think of the opener for Week 10 here, Saskatchewan, Ottawa?
Well, and that most recent home win, Ian, was a destruction of Calgary, 33-6. I mean, Ottawa, in a game that was lined very, very close, right? Ottawa's only a 1-point favorite in that game, win by 27. And they were the better team. There's no question about it. You hit on a couple of things that I like. And, you know, it's funny when I see being a Canadian Football League handicapper for only watching 1 year and being a serious one for the last couple of years, when I see these kids that we remember from college. And the wide receiving core, as you mentioned, I'll add to it Khalil Pimpleton, who at Central Michigan made me a bunch of money. But in the return game,
Yep.
He's been fantastic, right? So you got to be wary of Ottawa like you do with Toronto in the return game here with this guy catching the ball and bringing it back. They have so many weapons pass-wise. And if, let's just play hypotheticals. Let's say that even without Lanier, Saskatchewan's a better run defense this week because Trey Ford isn't present, because it is Drew Brown, who's not a dual threat quarterback. Let's just say that, for instance, they are a good run defense. Ottawa's the type of team that can, and in Canadian football, you should play this way anyway, but kind of inside out throw in order to run. And right now, Ottawa's got the capability to throw, to set up the run for themselves here. Saskatchewan, to me, Ian, it's a team that lived off of takeaways for so long this year. And last week, they only had one takeaway against Edmonton and gave up a bunch of yards and a bunch of points. And if they don't take the ball away, defensively, the pass defense hasn't been terrific. It's been the run defense for the most part and the ability to force the other team into problems. So Shea Patterson, since he took over at quarterback, have not liked the offense. It's been mediocre to below average at best, in my estimation. They try a lot of dink and dunk with Shea Patterson. Sometimes they go over the top, but it's not really a vertical offense that scares you. And maybe to some people's surprise, me being included here, when I was going through some numbers last night, Ottawa's allowed the least amount of first downs in the league. Ottawa's allowed less yards per game on average than Saskatchewan. Ottawa's allowed less points per game on average than Saskatchewan. And here, Saskatchewan's gotten more of the defensive talk than Ottawa has. So where scheduling is concerned, Ottawa's in their third straight home game plus the bye, right? They haven't had to travel at all. Just stay at home, collect wins, have a bye week. Whereas you mentioned, that trip from Edmonton to Ottawa on a short work week, I think is important. We've seen, I forget which head coach I read earlier this season that really was complaining about these short weeks in Canadian football. Not a surprise.
I know which quarterback it was, McLeod Bethel Thompson. The guy wouldn't shut the fuck up about it.
And maybe that's exactly what I'm thinking of, Ian. And Bethel Thompson, we'll get into that later because we still haven't talked about Edmonton. But I think it is a difference maker here in this game. The one thing, as I talked about Saskatchewan taking the ball away, Ottawa's a team that hasn't committed a lot of turnovers, and only 14 turnovers on the year. They're pretty good at protecting the football. I would think they're the right side here. I think this is a spot in the season where, boy, Saskatchewan probably wishes, give us the bye week. Let us get healthy. Let us just take a rest here. But it's not going to happen in this game. So I think Ottawa at home, where they have been tremendous. Ottawa at home with a personnel advantage at this point in time. Ottawa at home with a scheduling advantage. It all adds up. I could see why the line moved. And if I was going to play, I'd still be playing Ottawa. The total is kind of shaky here at 48.5 because, to your point, if in fact Ottawa can run the football with Armstead and they become balanced in this game, point production is going to go up. And we saw last week in chase mode, and I get that it's Edmonton's defense, not Ottawa's, but in chase mode, Saskatchewan was able to score a little bit. So 48.5 could be in danger. So I don't think I'll look that way, but I'd probably look Ottawa minus the 3.
Yeah, it's there are concerns. Like I said, the bye week has not always been a great thing this year for certain teams. There is some schedule. I get that Ottawa's schedule and getting to 5-2, leaves something to be desired. It was in a Hamilton game, 2 games against Edmonton. I know that they feasted on a couple of lesser teams. I get that, but I can't get over the injury report for Saskatchewan. I just can't. I mean, it's bad. It's really bad. And I missed talking about a few players on this. There's more than what I mentioned. I mentioned Brammer on the O-line. I mentioned Jamarcus Hardrick on the O-line. Ryan Sevier on the O-line. He just got hurt, I think, last week against Edmonton. Elbow injury. He's out. I mentioned, of course, Lanier, who's going to miss a second straight game. What about Jameer Thurman? Great linebacker addition from Hamilton, my Ticats. They got him in the offseason. He's out for this game. So they're missing, Lanier on the defensive line, Thurman at linebacker, who's an outstanding player. And now you've got 3-4 starters out on the O-line. That's trouble. I mean, that's a lot. Oled out. That's tough. That's tough. We're going to find out what kind of coach Corey Mace is here to overcome all these injury obstacles that they've got to incur. And another thing, too, for Saskatchewan is Trevor Harris is going to play next week. He almost came back for this game. Trevor Harris is probably going to be back next week when they host Montreal, the defending Grey Cup champs. And what a game that will be in Week 11 next week. Does Saskatchewan think, you know what, short week, we're banged up? Did they let this? I don't want to say let this one go if they fall behind, but maybe they could. And then you've got Montreal next week at home. You're going to get Trevor Harris back, who I think, obviously, with what we've seen out of Shea's been okay at times, but he's obviously not been the downfield thrower Trevor Harris is. If they get behind, will we see Saskatchewan fighting the good fight here in this game? That's a big question, I think, as well. All right, Friday night, we've got Calgary and Toronto. Rematch here, one of two games that are a rematch of last week. Argos 1 point home favorite, 49.5 the total. So at halftime of Toronto Calgary last week, I jumped on Calgary last week, early in the week. The money line price of like minus 135, and it went up and up. It went through the 2.5, it went through the 3, it went through the 3.5, it went all the way up to 4, 4.5. You could have even gotten a +5 at a couple books here in Ontario with Toronto pregame. And I actually jumped on a Toronto +5 and looked for a middle. And sure enough, the final score just couldn't have ended any better for me. 27-23, a 4-point Calgary win. But the Calgary money line, which was a sizable bet for me, was not looking good at halftime. And I'm just watching that game, and I'm thinking to myself, this fucking Jake Maier, man, he is just the most frustrating son of a bitch at quarterback that you'll ever watch. I mean, he will look good one drive. He'll look awful the next drive. He'll look good one quarter, bad the next quarter, one good half, one bad half, one good game, one bad game. Actually, in his CFL career, quite honestly, especially going back to last year when he really struggled, he's probably had a 3 bad games to 1 good game ratio in his career in the CFL. And I'm thinking to myself after that first half, here's Jake Maier. He had a brutal interception in that game, which set up an easy touchdown with a short field for Cam Dukes and the Argos. And I'm thinking to myself, well, he's just stewarded this Calgary team with a horseshit first half performance. Horseshit, as the old coach Jim Morrow would say. He would use that word a little bit back in the day. But when you look at this performance from Maier, and I'm like, geez, they're in tough. Well, apparently at halftime, and they said it on the broadcast early in the third quarter, and I saw it on Twitter floating around what Dickinson said at halftime about his Calgary team. If you want to be a Calgary Stampeder next week, you better damn well show up here in this second half, is something that he said. Well, apparently message received, because it was a different Calgary team in the second half. They shut down Toronto. They were brought a lot more pressure, blitzed a little bit more, Cam Dukes. And I think when you do that against him, he's struggled against it, and he showed it again in the second half. And to Jake Maier's credit, he finally made some plays. There was a couple of great catches down the field in that game by the Calgary Stampeders, no question about it. And I think when you look at that, you got to give him credit for that. Now, I still think even with some of the throws he catches or completions that he made, Rob, I know there's that stat that you can look at now in NFL and college football. You can find every stat where it's turnover-worthy plays, right? Turnover-worthy throws. I don't know if there's a CFL quarterback on a weekly basis that makes more turnover-worthy throws than Jake Maier. Because if you look in that first half, he could have even been picked another time or two as well. He just is not always pinpoint accurate with his placement of the football, and it often comes back to bite him. But he did what he had to do in the second half. He was a lot better. He found Reggie Bagleton, who had a monster game. Mark and Michelle and Cam Eccles were outstanding for Calgary, receiving in that second half. So credit to him. They found a way. The defense tightened up on Toronto, and they came back and from a big deficit, a 21-0 fourth quarter for Calgary to come all the way back and win 27-23. Now we get the rematch in Toronto. A part of the reason, Rob, I took Calgary last week is because they've been a different team at McMahon Stadium, a team good enough to beat the BC Lions at home. And I figured off that blowout loss to Ottawa on the road, come back home. Toronto's been a little fortunate to win some of the games they have, especially the Winnipeg game with a bobbling offense. Calgary could get right at home, but they certainly didn't make it easy on themselves with that bad first half, but they found a way. Now in this rematch, I'm kind of thinking I can't take Calgary now, because what they've been at home has not been what they've been on the road. And there are some big-time concerns with their recent performances on the road. We saw them give up 41 points in a road loss to Winnipeg. That's not what you want to see. We saw them get absolutely hammered by the Ottawa Red Blacks in their last road game. This team is still searching for their first road win, 0-4, straight up on the road this season. And if you're the Toronto Argonauts, you're going to be wanting to exact a little payback after letting one slip away Ryan Dinwiddie took responsibility. I'll give him credit for that. The head coach of the Argos after the game saying, I'll take responsibility for us letting that one get away, rather than his players or his quarterback who's been embattled in the Argo fan base, Cameron Dukes, take all the heat. So for me, situationally, I think there's things to like about Toronto. I didn't deserve the win, but I'm not giving the money back. When Toronto beat Winnipeg in their last home game in overtime a couple weeks ago. But that, again, Winnipeg was winless on the road, and it was more so I don't think Winnipeg will find a way to win on the road, and sure enough, they didn't, and Toronto did. Toronto at home, Calgary's not shown me anything on the road. Jake Mayer's been even more sketchy as far as his play away from home as well at the quarterback position. So Toronto, for me, in this one is probably where I'd look from a side perspective. The concern that I have still is it's probably going to be because Ryan Dinwiddie is, I think, very, very stubborn in this regard. He's going to do the Dukes and Arbuckle cycle again, where, I think he's going to stick with Dukes. Chad Kelly is one more week. Next week, Chad Kelly's back. This is the final game of his 9-game suspension. So whoever's at quarterback for Toronto, and I think it'll be Dukes again, this will be the last time because Chad Kelly's on his way back next week. But what I am upset about, Rob, and I've been saying this multiple times on Twitter, where's Brian Scott? Why hasn't he gotten a chance? This guy's been in the system with the Argos now for 2 years, 2 full seasons. I believe this is his 3rd year. We only saw him once this year, and it was in mop-up duty when they were down big to Montreal at home earlier this season. He came in late, and I get it. Prevent defense, the Alouettes were up comfortably, but he went right down the field and scored a touchdown. And he had a big, deep ball, and it was right on the money, Brian Scott. And yet this guy can't get a crack at starting at quarterback for Toronto, and they've had clear issues with consistency at the position for weeks. It boggles the mind to me that he doesn't even get a sniff. And he knows the offense, he knows the playbook, because this is year 3 for Brian Scott with the Argos. And yet they're cycling between Dukes, who struggled for weeks and gotten progressively, I think, worse, and Nick Arbuckle, who, how many teams has he been with in the CFL now? 3, 4, 5, bounced around, Calgary, Ottawa, you name it, now Toronto, because he's just not proven himself at any point as a number 1 quarterback, yet we can't give Brian Scott one friggin' start? I don't get it. And I don't know what Brian Scott did to piss off his coach, if anything, but to me, this is just insane that he hasn't gotten a look yet. Either way, I still like Toronto a little bit in this game at around a pick 'em. And if anything, you just got to hope that whoever's at quarterback, if it's Dukes, this is his last shot to show something before Chad Kelly comes back, and maybe that lights a spark to say, you know what, let me go out with a good performance here and give this coaching staff something to be positive about regarding my play before Chad Kelly, the number 1 guy, gets back here. So what do you think here, Rob, for Friday night Stamps and Argos?
Well, I'm with you. I mean, this is one that I played already, and I did play Toronto in the revenge mode. A 21-0 4th quarter, like Calgary pulled off last week. Not really. I don't expect that to happen again. You talked about a lot of the things that I would have talked about already. Obviously, the home road dichotomy with Calgary is severe. Very good at home, very bad on the road. And it's funny the adjectives that you use to describe Jake Mayer. In my notes here, as I read, Mayer on the road has been spotty. So that's another one we can add to his list. He's just not. And it goes the same for Cam Dukes, right? I mean, Cam Dukes is just good enough not to get benched officially. Just good enough to I'll
say one thing quickly, Rob. I like that he used his legs more last week. He wasn't doing that enough the few weeks before that. He used his legs. He is a little more athletic than you think. He's got to do that again here. And I think he will, actually, because, look, this is it for him. Chad Kelly's back next week, and when Chad Kelly's back, he's in the game. He's starting.
Yeah, and I'll point out a couple of things here, Ian, why he should use his legs, like you're mentioning. To me, Calgary the last 3 weeks on the defensive side of the football, it doesn't show up in all 3 games in sack total, but they've sold out for quarterback pressure. Last week, 6 sacks against Toronto. Obviously, the Argos have to correct that this week. You can't take 6 sacks with your quarterback again. But the Stampeders have actually, when you watch, and I was texting Gabe Morency, we talked about earlier, either a couple weeks ago or the week before with Calgary. And I'm like, it's like Calgary sends 5, 6 every play. And they have to do that to protect that secondary, I think, because that secondary was getting blitzed early on. So you know, somehow, some way, pass rush and secondary are hand in glove. Can't have really one without the other. They're trying to, and if you don't have one, you got to cover it with the other. It's what they're trying to do. So Cam Duke's legs do come into play against pass rush, certainly. And he made a couple of big plays. Take it from a guy who had under 49.5 last week and just absolutely cried my eyes out after seeing that final field goal go through
Oh
for
my
50
gosh, that's
points.
brutal. Yeah, that affected the total. Yep.
But you know, it probably shouldn't have got there because, like you say, it got there because of our pal Jake Mayer, who threw the pick that was returned to the 11-yard line that wound up at a touchdown a play later. You can't give away 11-yard touchdown drives, and that probably makes a difference in that game as well. For Toronto, the good thing about them, Ian, is that when they get inside the red zone, they've scored 12 of 17 in red zone opportunities this season, which is really, really good as opposed to what we were talking about with Winnipeg earlier, not being able to score it in the red zone. My personal opinion here is that this game should stay under. They give me the same number again, 49.5. I would think that this one stays under 49.5. There are a lot of things last week that contributed to a 27-23 game that probably should not have been. I think Toronto's the right side because I can't trust Calgary on the road, nor do I want to trust Jake Mayer on the road. And one last thing, I will again credit Gabe for opening my eyes to a bunch of weeks back was he's like, you know what, Rob, for a college Hall of Fame quarterback, for a Hall of Fame coach, Dave Dickinson calls a lot of dink and dunk plays. He just doesn't attack teams. He's very conservative. He punts on 3rd and 1 where other teams just roll their quarterback out there and get it. He does a lot of conservative things on the offensive end, and it takes a bunch for Calgary to put together a drive. And with that play calling and the pass attempts that Mayer is expected to complete, it is surprising that he is as poor as he is. You should be able to complete a lot of these passes that he doesn't. So I think the same of Toronto. They're a little bit more dink and dunk. Kadeem Carey's a nice running back. Coxie from Memphis. We remember him in college. I swear to God, that's how I remember most of these guys. I always think, oh, yeah, that's the Memphis kid, Coxie. They've got a little bit of explosiveness. But I think Toronto's the right side, and I think under 49.5 will happen this week.
Yeah, the first two games, I'm pretty neutral with the totals this week in the CFL. So, again, the Saskatchewan-Ottawa game, not a strong opinion on the total. Same thing here with this one. I'll say this about Dickinson. I think he wants to throw deep more than he does. I think the issue he has, because it's the issue I have with Jake Mayer, he's not a great accurate deep ball guy. He's just not. And I remember back in Dave Dickinson's years ago when he first assumed the head coaching role from John Huffnagel, who retired, and he had Bo Levi Mitchell in his prime as his quarterback, won a Grey Cup together, Dave Dickinson and Bo Levi Mitchell back in 2014. Bo Levi Mitchell would throw the deep ball, and they'd take deep shots quite often. So I think this is just, I don't trust Jake Mayer throwing the deep ball, being accurate with it, putting it in a good spot, maybe that's causing these kind of dink and dunk, little more conservative short to intermediate play calls in the passing game, Rob.
Yeah, and you know what? I would agree, because when you watch some of these throws, and you've talked about it already, Jake Mayer, it's almost like he doesn't see the defensive, that side of the field well enough. Like he throws into these trap defenses where you see a guy flying in to make a pick that, oh my God, Jake Mayer didn't even see him coming. Where most quarterbacks read and know where the ball should go. It's almost like, oh, my guy's open, I'll fling it. And then, no, your guy's not open because they're running another guy at him. So perhaps that's the issue. And if it is, you can't blame the head coach for that. Let's be protective of the football. Let's not take any chances. But I think if Toronto's able to protect their quarterback this week, Ian, and not allow 6 sacks, I think Toronto will get the job done at home.
We go from Jake Mayer in one game to the man he replaced at quarterback in the next game. And that, of course, is Bo Levi Mitchell. Now with the Hamilton Tiger Cats as they take on the Montreal Alouettes. Montreal 7.5-point home favorites, 50.5 being the total here in this game. Here's another total. It's tricky. That's Hamilton's a team I want to bet overs. Montreal, not quite so much. How will this one play out? Although, holy shit, for those, and I was there at the game last week. If you had the under in that Montreal-Hamilton game, my goodness, you're doing a panic attack in that fourth quarter at the end. That game was a stone-cold under, for 3 quarters, 3.5 quarters, and then just goes haywire at the end. And if Montreal converts that 2-point conversion, late in the fourth quarter, it probably goes over. So it was just, if you had the under, my goodness, you're hanging on for dear life, and you never thought it would get that close to the total in that game. How will this one go now? Another rematch. Here's the thing. I don't trust Hamilton, okay? They got the offense got completely shut down by this excellent Montreal defense, which got Marc-Antoine Dequoy back on the field in the secondary, and he's a ball hawk, and he shuts people down in the passing game. They did that to Bo Levi Mitchell and the Ticat receivers. Not to mention the other guys they've got. They've got a great secondary. Dequoy healthy again. Wesley Sutton's a good cornerback. Tyrese Beverette, I think, is an outstanding player for them in that pass defense. I think their pass rush and their front seven's getting better each week. They got after Mitchell a couple of times. So that Montreal defense is outstanding, and they're certainly a much better defense. But Montreal suddenly at home here at Percival Molson Stadium, and I say this all the time when it's a Montreal home game, and if you're going to watch it on television for the sanctity and the long-term health of your eardrums, mute the television. You can't watch these games with the sound on because it's the air horns constantly. The whole game. The whole friggin' game in Montreal home games. And it's like, I would say probably half the attendance at these Montreal home games, they give them these damn air horns. And the whole game, it's the whole game, and you can clearly hear it on the television. And it's like, oh my gosh, I got to mute this. You got to mute it when Montreal's on defense, because that's when they do it for the most part. It's when the other team has the football. But my gosh, it's not the most pleasant sound in the world. Let's put it that way. But Montreal suddenly, Rob, on their home field, a little overvalued, based on some of their recent results. And they are laying more than a touchdown here. You look at the last home game against Saskatchewan. And, of course, that was the game where Caleb Evans started the game, and he was terrible in the first half. Jason Moss replaces him with Davis Alexander, and Davis Alexander, the Portland State FCS quarterback from back in the day, was phenomenal. He started that second half 12 for 12 against Saskatchewan. He couldn't be stopped. They come all the way back. The Montreal defense tightens up against Patterson and the Riders offense in the second half. They come back, and they win 20-16. And again, though, life and death to win that game. We saw what happened against Toronto. Their one loss. They were 7-point favorites. They lose outright on this field at Percival Molson Stadium. The Calgary game before that, they were laying more than a touchdown. They had a terrible start. They barely came back to win the game straight up. Never sniffed a point spread cover in that game at home. So that's the issue here. Suddenly you've got a Alouettes team that 0-3 against the spread their last 3 home games. Depends on what number you got Saskatchewan. There were 4.5s out there a couple of times. So if you got Saskatchewan plus 4.5, that's why in the last home game, that's why I call it 0-3 ATS for Montreal, their last 3 home games. But I still don't know, though, if I trust Hamilton enough. Will Cody Fajardo be back? We don't know yet. We're going to have to wait until Thursday or Friday. Final practices roll in, but there is a chance that Cody Fajardo returns. He did not practice last week. He was on the sideline. People thought he was back to practice. Yeah, he was back at practice, but he was just a spectator. He wasn't practicing last week. So will he be back? For now, it's Davis Alexander again for a second straight week. And I think because they beat Hamilton so soundly last week, Jason Moss may not be in a hurry, to rush Cody Fajardo back, thinking of the long-term prognosis. And it's a long season, 18 games. You don't have to rush him back. Davis looked good against Hamilton last week, especially in the second half. And I give Davis Alexander credit. Showed me something mentally, Rob. Not a good start. Pick 6 even at the very beginning of that game by Kenneth George, who played at Tennessee, I believe. Nice pick 6 there in that early in that game. But after that, he figured things out, started using his legs, and his ability to shift the pocket and throw on the run's impressive. I've noticed that about Davis Alexander now in these 2 appearances, and he got better and better as the game went on, and very, very solid second half as well. Of course, Jason Moss plays quarterback shuffle late and gets his other quarterback, Caleb Evans, almost killed, and honestly, gets hurt at the end of the game. And Caleb Evans, with that injury he suffered, he's out for the season for the Montreal Alouettes. So they signed Dominique Davis to be their 3rd quarterback behind Alexander and the returning Fajardo. So that's where they are at quarterback. I can't say I have a strong take on this game. My advice would be Montreal's a parlay piece probably because I don't see Hamilton going in there and winning. The one thing that's against Hamilton right now, not only is it their defense that struggled, and Bo Levi Mitchell and the offense, to me, you know what they've proven? They've proven they can move the football and light up the Edmonton Elks. That's about it. Because you put them up against any other team this year with at least a capable or better defense, and it's not been a great Bo Levi Mitchell-led Hamilton offense this year. I do think they need to continue to commit to James Butler. Sometimes they do throw the ball a little too much. We'll see if how that goes for them in this game. But I'm telling you what, they have been dominated the last 2 years by Montreal to the tune of 8-0 straight up, 7-0-1 against the spread in the last 8 meetings for the Montreal Alouettes over the Hamilton Ticats. And the last few meetings for Montreal, they had an 11-point win at home, a 26-point win in Hamilton, a 13-point win in Hamilton, only a 2-point win in Montreal last October, but they won. 15-point win at home against Hamilton in the playoff game last year, the East semifinal. And then, of course, last week, a 17-point win in Hamilton. So not a track record that has me interested in my Ticats. I'll cheer as a fan. Not a single penny of my money on them as a bettor this week. What do you think here, Rob? Hamilton, Montreal?
I think a lot of things, Ian, and none of them lead me to the window. I'll tell you that. I mean, it's a difficult game, and maybe Cody Fajardo being the most difficult thing. And you can't project him to play, which you would love to. You would love to be progressive in that regard, because if he's announced, it's not 7 anymore. It's 8, it's 9, it's 9.5. It's it goes through the ceiling, and then you can't play. I have an issue with Bo Levi Mitchell, just like you have an issue with Jake Mayer. To me, and you're the Hamilton guy. But I used to say this about Matthew Stafford in college at Georgia. He's good enough to get you from the 20 to the 10, and then he's an absolute mess. And it's just, how do you have a team in Hamilton offensively that can average 7 yards per play on first down and just like never go the length of the field? Like, they're so maddening because they can look inside of one drive. They can look terrific, rattle off 3 first downs in a row, and the next thing you know, it's a penalty or it's a stupid sack or it's a crappy throw by Mitchell, who misses more throws than, at least in my eyes, than any QB in this league. He misses a bunch. And then come back and make great throws. So he's frustrating to me, but he's good enough to get inside a big number like this. Hamilton hasn't received this many points in a game this year, 7.5. They've been underdog almost every week, but they haven't been underdog by this size. And if Montreal does take a slightly lesser approach here, then they could cover. And you mentioned Montreal's home woes, covering spreads, so certainly that could come into play. The Davis Alexander thing is a little bit questionable to me too, because he left that game, Ian, last week with a leg injury. Like, he was hurt and came off, and then Caleb Evans came out for that.
He took a wicked hit from Casey Sales, and it looked like he was KO'd, done for the night. And the next thing you know, he's back out there a few plays later, drive later. Yeah.
Because Evans got crushed, right? And then, we got to put the other hurt guy back in. So marching 2 hurt guys out there, and obviously you can't bring Evans back out this week. I don't know how healthy he is, to tell you the honest truth, Alexander. And maybe the game plan, if he's not on 2 good legs, gets a little more protective. But with all the talk for how good they've been defensively, and they deserve it. It's a good defense. But some of these offensive numbers they put up just go unnoticed for Montreal. They lead the league in TDs, 25 TDs. They're second in average yards per play. They're first in completion percentage. Phil Pott's been amazing at wide receiver. It seems like whenever they need a play, this guy's open. And the stadium knows it's going his way, and he's still open. So Montreal can be a little bit scary because
wait till they get Tyler Snead out of East Kakalaki back in that receiving core. He's been out all these weeks too.
Extra weaponry, right? If Fajardo's been terrific when he was in there, and Alexander, as you mentioned, has really taken over the reins here and done well too. So therefore, I can stand on both sides of the fence and make a legitimate argument back and forth both ways, to the point where I'm so confused I don't want to make a play. I don't have a good opinion on the total here, simply because if I had to, I'll say this. Here's the best bet of the whole night, I guess, is these Hamilton second halves over have been instant cash. They're 7-1 over the total in the second half. And not only are they 7-1 over the total in the second half, their games averaged 31.3 points per game in the second half. You talked about how wild it got at the end last week. It's kind of like what we saw out of Saskatchewan last year when Saskatchewan's second halves became the absolute gold rush. It looks like Hamilton's second halves are that this year. They're good enough to score points. They're frustrating enough to keep you off of them as a side. Maybe you just sit back till halftime and play second half over.
You know what, too? 3-1 to the over, Montreal at home. But you're right. It kind of feels like maybe based on that stat, you wait it out, see if it starts off. We get a 10-7 type of 13-7 type of first half. And then things start to open up and you get involved at halftime with the total. 4-0 to the under for what it's worth, the last 4 meetings with the Alouettes and the Ticats. So we'll see.
I'll just put in real quick here because honestly, what was Montreal doing going for 2? Up 33-16. Were they scared that with about 90 seconds left that Hamilton was going to come back with 2 TDs, 2 2-point conversions, and a field goal to tie him at 35?
Yeah.
They needed the 2 points that bad. When they marched that offense back out, and I think there was a penalty on the play which got them closer to the goal line, which is maybe why they went for 2. But just kick the extra point, and over bettors are happy. Under bettors are sad. They didn't kick the extra point, and it went the reverse way. So that's how that's how closely we split some of these things. Sometimes at the end, boy, we're total insider concerned.
No doubt. No, there's no question. I'll say this about that finish. It reminded me of James Franklin, Penn State against Georgia State, like 3, 4, 5 years ago, 44-3. Let's kick a field goal with a minute left. There's some James Franklin right there in Jason Moss at the end of that game. Doesn't surprise me. He's got a very, very intense attitude. Jason Moss, fiery to say the least, on the sideline for Montreal. I guess he's got that a little. I think too he was pissed off about the cheap shot. He thought it was a cheap shot on Davis Alexander by Casey Sale. I think there was a little. Let's stick their nose in it and rub it in a little bit. Division rival with that 2-point attempt late in the game. All right, final game for Week 10. BC Edmonton Sunday Night Football, CFL style, and this is a game that will have. You talk about great broadcasters here in Canada. Dustin Nielsen for the CFL, and this is the one game he's doing this week, BC and Edmonton. He's phenomenal, man. This guy's like the Gus Johnson in Canada. Energy. He's are you kidding me? What's happening here? And he's losing his mind. The Mario Alford kick return touchdown to begin that game with Edmonton, Saskatchewan last week. I mean, he's a phenomenal. He just gets into the game. He loves football. He loves his job. And you hear it in the broadcast. Always so much fun when he calls a game. He'll be calling this one. BC Edmonton. Edmonton 1.5-point home favorites, 49 the total. Yes, that is Edmonton favored. You are not seeing things, but there's a very good reason for it. You're talking about one of the biggest quarterback downgrades you could ask for when you go from Vernon Adams to Jake Dolegala. And look, Jake Dolegala's got starting experience, Rob. Got into many games last year with the Saskatchewan Roughriders. But you have to ask yourself, how many of those games did he play great? And not too many. Now, Saskatchewan in that situation last year when Dolegala took over, the team was in shambles. They had injuries. The O-line was a disaster, complete and utter disaster for the Saskatchewan Roughriders. And that doesn't help him because he's a very tall, lanky quarterback. Very tall. I mean, this is a very tall son of a gun, Jake Dolegala, but not as mobile, obviously, as some other quarterbacks in the league. He does need a decent amount of protection. Saskatchewan never gave that to him. Their defense was horrendous down the stretch last year. That's when that incredible, 14-1, 15-1 overrun for Saskatchewan started midway through last year when the defense just fell apart. And a lot of those games that went over, Dolegala was at quarterback for the Saskatchewan Roughriders, but he was inconsistent. He'd have a few good drives here and there, a few good games, but he'd also have a lot of bad games, and the offense would bog down. He'd throw some interceptions and just wouldn't move the chains enough. So it was a real mixed bag for Jake Dolegala. And the one thing he had issues with last year was interceptions, way too many. And if you look at his track record, that's going to be something he's going to have to watch for here in this game. Now, the good news for BC is they played last week against Winnipeg, are off a shutout loss. I think they pretty much knew right away, and I think Rick Campbell, the head coach of BC, knew right away. Probably not going to see Vernon Adams this week. I mean, I think they pretty much knew it was not going to be a high probability of him starting this week. So you've got You've given Jake Dolegala the full week of reps with the first team offense in practice. You're at least going to put him in a situation where he's going to be prepared. He's going to have the time to try to gain some continuity and some chemistry with this receiving core. And I think you've got an offense on a team that I still think is a good team in spite of the last two losses against Calgary and Winnipeg that knows we got blanked. It's just a dismal, kind of an embarrassing performance for an offense that we think we are, which is pretty damn good to get shut out like that. So it's going to be interesting. And I'll say this for BC, their O-line's got to step up. They got totally ambushed by Winnipeg. It was amazing how poorly they were how poorly they played on the offensive line last week. But if they can hold up a little bit more, and I will say this, Edmonton's not one of the better pass rushing defenses in the CFL. Hell, we know what Edmonton's defense is. It's struggled all year. If they can hold up even just a little bit and give Dolegala some time, he's certainly got weapons. When you talk about Alexander Hollins and you talk about a returning Keon Hatcher, and you talk about, obviously, Eberhardt, Berryhill have stepped up for them. Justin McGinnis. There's definitely players that you can throw the football to here for Dolegala. So going to be interesting to see how he plays. He does have starting experience. Got into a bunch of games last year for Saskatchewan. And the good news is you're playing against the weakest defense in the CFL, or one of them, maybe 1A, 1B, Edmonton and Hamilton, as far as pretty bad defenses. So I think BC is going to be Dolegala is at least in a position where he could be solid here. I don't know if he'll light it up, but he could be solid here. We all saw what happened on the Edmonton side. Obviously, we've been calling all season from the screaming everyone on Twitter X that follows this league for Trey Ford to start, to finally make the quarterback change from McLeod Bethel Thompson to Trey Ford. I'm even surprised in Jarius Jackson that he waited this long, quite honestly, because this was a Chris Jones guy all the way, McLeod Bethel Thompson. Chris Jones was the GM. Chris Jones was the head coach. He brought the guy in. He's the one that's blackballed and not given Trey Ford the fair chance from day one, even when he got 4 of the wins last year for Edmonton. That was a Chris Jones thing all the way. I thought the moment Jarius came in, we'd see Trey Ford maybe even a game or two earlier than we did, and even Jarius stuck with MBT longer than I thought. But finally, he made the change. We saw what he did when he entered the fourth quarter against Hamilton, even though it was a prevent Ticat defense that was up big. What he can do with his legs and his feet and his mobility, throw on the run, make plays, open things up. And we saw it again last week. And you saw it right away. Just evading the pass rush, finding Geno Lewis, leading to a field goal, the big bomb down the sideline to Tevin Jones in the first quarter. You just automatically saw what he's capable of, his threat to move in the pocket and run with the football, and then what it did for the run game, which had been sputtering all season, and it opened up Javon Leake and everything else all of a sudden for the Edmonton Elks offense. You got to upgrade the Edmonton offense, not just a little bit, but significantly, after what we have seen here with Trey Ford, even in just a game and part of the fourth quarter against Hamilton. And offense has often not been the issue for Edmonton. Even 3 of the last 4 games in Ottawa on a very short week, in Jarius Jackson's first game as interim head coach after they fired Jones. A brutal spot, too, is traveling on the road, short week in Ottawa. They only scored 14 points. But outside of that, the other 3 games in their last 4, the first game against Ottawa, they put up 34, and that was with MBT. Still got to 28, most of those points with Trey Ford against Hamilton. And then we saw the 42-point explosion last week in the win against Saskatchewan. So there's no question about it for me. This is hands down the over of the week that I like the most. 49, Dolegala at quarterback. I don't mind it. Is he VA? No. But he's not playing Montreal's defense. He's not playing one of the elite stop units in the CFL. This is Edmonton. And I think with the full week of practice and all the reps with the first team offense and those receivers, he's going to be in a position to at least be serviceable, be solid, maybe even be good, maybe even be great because of the product of this being the Edmonton Elks defense that he's playing. And then on the flip side, I think Edmonton's just such a more dynamic offense. We're already seeing it. Javon Leake is probably going to be the running back again. Why not? He should be. Tevin Jones, Geno Lewis, Hergy Mayala, Dylan Mitchell, Curly Gittins Jr. Like, they actually have a pretty good skill position group, Edmonton. But with McLeod Bethel Thompson, you just didn't see it, often enough. And don't look now, the BC defense, suddenly the last few games hasn't been nearly as good. They give up 25 in a loss to Jake Mayer and the Calgary Stampeders. Zach Collaros, who had struggled much of the season. The offense, which couldn't finish drives. And in the second half, I think a product of it, the offense wasn't moving, but that defense, not a great performance against a Winnipeg offense that hasn't been anything to write home about. Gave up 25 in that game. I think on the road, it's possible Edmonton can get you 28, 31, 34, even against BC at home. And I think BC can move the ball against Edmonton. So 49, I'm convinced if Vernon Adams is healthy, this is a total in the 50s. This might even be 51, 52, 53 if Vernon Adams is healthy, but he's not. So you're getting a discount on BC, and you're absolutely getting a discount with the over. And I like that over 49. I do like Edmonton, too, in this football game. I think they could win it. I like the momentum, and I was on Edmonton plus the points last week, too, along with the over against Saskatchewan. It was a nice 2-0 in that game for me. I think Edmonton and over are certainly the ways I'm looking here as well, but I think I like the total just a bit more. Rob, what do you think here, the finale for Week 10, BC, Edmonton?
Well, if I could rewind just about everything you just said, we'd be in total agreement. And I think I'll take it one step further, Ian, is I thought the best play of all in this game, which I got to immediately, was the BC team total over 23.5. 24 points. Dolagala or Adams, it really shouldn't matter. We saw it last week. We talked about Shea Patterson leading that Saskatchewan offense. It hasn't been good. It's been, moderate to poor for the most part. And yet they came up with 31 points. They came up with 392 total yards. They came up with 6.6 a play, ran the football well, just couldn't stop the other side. So to me, the full game total was a given in my estimation. Again, and the Jarius Jackson thing that you brought up really is kind of head scratching, because he was the OC last year during this whole time when Trey Ford was lighting it up. You would think those two are bonded at the hip with the play calling, they know what each other want. And last week it all gets done immediately. So the McLeod Bethel Thompson thing aside, they're a different team now. They're a different team offensively, but I would say that defense, off of what we saw last week, they can't stop anybody. And again, I'll just reiterate your points. BC's got weapons. They can protect the quarterback well enough against this particular defense. He can find open receivers against this.
And they'll be playing with a level of anger and embarrassment, probably the offense in particular, after getting absolutely shut out, goose-egged last week, right?
Yeah, you can't put two worse offensive efforts together. If you're BC, their caliber, right? They're just not used to putting together what they did against Calgary and what they did in the shutout loss to Winnipeg. So, all that being said, Winnipeg smothered them defensively. We know Edmonton really doesn't smother anything defensively. And the point should be there on both sides. The first game they played this year, Ian, was 24-21. So I would ask this to anybody who might need a little extra push to get to this over 49. In my mind, what do you consider in a 24-21 game that got to 45 points, where BC left a few on the table because they had a big offensive yardage day that day? Is it more important that we've gone from Vernon Adams to Jake Dolagala, or is it more important that we've gone from Bethel Thompson to Trey Ford? And it's probably more important that we've gone from Bethel Thompson to Trey Ford where scoring points is concerned. Again, no, Dolagala is not Vernon Adams, but he can certainly work this offense. And I think, a quarterback back there who's got weaponry and's got a little bit of time is a happy quarterback. They can run the football as well. And I like your point about the Lions defense, which hasn't been superb by any stretch as of late. So again, if 49 look low, I would take it even a little bit higher when you said the perceived total with Adams at quarterback would be maybe as high as 53. I think it might have even been to 54. I think they've cut this one by at least 5 points here without him on the field. So for me, BC team total, for me, full game total. And again, you could probably play both team totals, to be honest with you, because Edmonton is only 25 and a half.
Team total. In fact, I haven't played the Edmonton money line yet, because I'm thinking to myself, well, wait a minute. If I take the money line with Edmonton, I got to trust their defense to do good to win the game and ask them to win the game. You're talking about a one-win football team still,
right?
And now I've got to trust them to win the game. So I feel personally, I'm going to end up on the team total for Edmonton over instead of money line.
And I think you can play them both. I really do. So. I think this game probably lands mid-50s. I think they both probably get over. We get a little up and down game, which is the one that we got last week from Edmonton and Saskatchewan. And honestly, if you can get 73 out of Edmonton, Saskatchewan, um, even though Saskatchewan's defense was bruised and battered, BC's just doesn't qualify as an elite defense. So I like a lot of ways of over here. Not a prop player, so I wouldn't know what to recommend from that end. But I do think that these team totals are both makeable, and I do think that full and maybe the first half total is even makeable. Ian, you hate to project, well, they're going to get off to a fast start and continue all the way through, but that's kind of the way I see this game.
I think there's definitely a chance that we could see, again, more points, certainly on the BC side than expected, because, and I'm looking at Dolegala right now and his numbers last year for the Saskatchewan Roughriders. 64.9% completions, still threw for 2,600 yards in 13 games, 11 touchdowns, 9 interceptions was the issue. Yeah, he did have a lot of intercept, but he still had 11 touchdowns. He had 2,600 passing yards in 13 games. It's not great, but it's not horrible either. And again, you're going to have a full week of practice and probably the defense you'd most like to face in a situation like this if you're Jake Dolegala. So we'll see how it plays out Sunday night. Should be a fun and exciting way to end Week 10. And again, now Edmonton, it's just amazing the energy that is back in their sideline. Edmonton last week, and even at the end of the Hamilton game, once Trey Ford got into the game, it just lit a spark of energy and more enthusiasm and excitement to play the game, just because of the quarterback change. So long overdue, and it finally happened, getting to Trey Ford at quarterback. And of course, I made the Gus Johnson reference earlier at this when we started this preview. Gus Johnson actually called the CFL in the 90s briefly for ESPN when they had that United States expansion, which unfortunately was very short-lived. Did not last long, but we had those couple of years there with the Baltimore Stallions and the Shreveport Pirates and the Las Vegas Posse, Sacramento Gold Miners. They moved to the San Antonio Texans after that. But yeah, it did not work out, the United States expansion, but I know Gus did some CFL play-by-play just when he was a young broadcaster. His fame has gotten a little bit higher since then. Obviously, all these years, Gus has been doing college basketball and March Madness and college football and all the other stuff he's done. All right, let's do a little preseason. We're just going to do a brief overview here at Week 1. And the one thing I'm going to throw out to you, Rob, here with NFL preseason Week 1. So I knew the trend was strong. I knew what we've seen the last couple of seasons in Week 1 of the NFL preseason and the Hall of Fame game combined. But I wanted to put the numbers together and figure it out for sure. Overs, Hall of Fame game and Week 1 of the NFL preseason, the last 2 years, 2022, 2023, 25-8. 25-8 over the total. Week 1 and Hall of Fame game NFL preseason the last 2 years. And that's a huge spike because the year before that, it was 14-3 under in 2021. And all of a sudden here, Rob, these last 2 years, 25 overs, 8 unders, 1 push in Week 1 and Hall of Fame game preseason the last 2 years. Remarkable. And I knew it because I was on a lot of overs the last 2 years in the first week of the preseason. And to say things went well would be an understatement. The question is, does that continue on to this year with Week 1 in the preseason? So and I know you're an over guy too. I've picked out a couple overs I like. One of the 2 games on Thursday night I like an over with. I like the quarterback rotations for Lions Giants a little bit. I really do. I think 34.5 is pretty low there. Could see it go up and over. Houston, I like their rotation. We saw what we last week, what we got from the quarterback position there from them, including Davis Mills at the beginning of that game. It was very solid for the Houston Texans. When you look at their opponent there, the Pittsburgh Steelers, it looks like Justin Fields is going to start in this game for them. I think they're set up well. We've seen Tomlin teams, by the way, have a lot of success in the preseason the last few years. Pittsburgh's have been one of the really good preseason teams, and that total's been bumped up a bit. I agree with that on Friday night. I think Atlanta-Miami could be a nice little over situation. Look what you got for Miami. Mike White and Skylar Thompson, man. These are guys that have started a ton of games in the NFL, the last few years, both of them. And, of course, Mike White even going back to the New York Jets. For Atlanta, they've obviously not going to see Cousins. Who knows how long Penix is going to play in his first ever snap in an NFL game, albeit preseason. But even if Penix plays very little and Cousins is out, you're going to see a lot of Taylor Heineke, an experienced veteran quarterback who we don't love betting in the regular season, Rob, on a mediocre team, but in the preseason against backup defenses, sure. Yeah, we trust a Taylor Heineke to move the football. And then my guy, Nathan Rourke. He's now with the Atlanta Falcons. Hopefully he gets a fair shot there from Raheem Morris and the coaching staff there in Atlanta. And you talk about a guy that lit it up in the preseason with Jacksonville last year. Nathan Rourke can do that. And he's got the tools, the arm, the mobility. He's got a lot of experience now, CFL and NFL, of course. Left the CFL in a great situation with the BC Lions to try to get his shot in the NFL. So that Atlanta-Miami over on Friday night stands out to me a little bit. And then there's a couple on Saturday. Chicago-Buffalo. There's another team, Chicago. I mean, if you had Chicago-Houston Hall of Fame game over, that's a terrible beat. You deserve to cash. It had already gone over the total, and then the thunderstorm arrives, and the game gets called off, postponed, or suspended, I should say, after that. So you deserved a better fate. I think Chicago-Buffalo. Trubisky, of course, now is back in Buffalo. And Shane Buechele, look, he's had some decent preseason performances going back to when he was with Andy Reid in the Kansas City Chiefs organization. So I think for a third string for Buffalo, could do a lot worse than Shane Buechele, who's been around the block. Still remember the nice career he had at SMU many years ago. So that could be a decent little overplay as well. I think Cleveland's quarterback rotation is set up well, but I'm not alone in that because that total with Packers-Browns has been hammered up for Saturday as well. So those are just a few early in the week that kind of stand out to me. Teams that you want to be worried about, LA Rams and Sean McVay, historical, do not care, do not give two shits about the preseason. Does he with the LA Rams? So be careful with that. Kevin O'Connell with the Minnesota Vikings, pretty dismal preseason record. His 2 seasons at the helm with the Vikings. So be careful of coaches and teams that have shown the propensity not to care in the preseason and not have that great straight up and or ATS record. Kevin O'Connell, Sean McVay, 2 coaches that stand out like a sore thumb in that regard. So those are just some overview, rapid fire thoughts I have for NFL preseason week 1. What say you, Rob?
Well, generally speaking, Ian, first-year head coaches like to create a culture, so to speak, right? And the preseason is the time where you lay the culture. Now, first-year head coach and first-time head coach are 2 different things. So we have to split them up, right? The first-time head coaches are the guys that really want to set the culture. That's Dave Canales at Carolina walking in. Let's straighten things out. Jared Mayo at New England. Let's straighten things out. Mike McDonald at Seattle already has done some work in Seattle as far as making them more physical and waking that team up to, hey, this isn't the fun-loving Pete Carroll, we, throw the football around and tell some jokes type of practice. He's dead serious here. And Brian Callahan at Tennessee. Those guys, first time, I'd look their way, not saying you play them all the time, but you have to give those guys an initial look. There's some first season head coaches that have been around the block. Jim Harbaugh's been around the block. So check his track record. Harbaugh 10-6 straight up preseason, 10-6 against the spread, 5-10-1 over under. Dan Quinn, been around the block. A loser in preseason, 5-16 against the spread. You were pointing out guys who don't give a darn. Maybe Dan Quinn, one of those at 5-16. Of course, Raheem Morris, been around the block, but now with Atlanta first time. The one interesting pairing here is Harbaugh and Greg Roman, his OC, have been together before, so maybe they're on the same page early. We'll see. But the first-time head coaches, the 4 I mentioned earlier, I would pay somewhat of attention to. And then there's another group I had to just establish one guy by himself, Ian, and that's like a tone setter in preseason. And to me, that's Antonio Pierce of the Raiders. His personality just suggests we're going to win every game. I don't care what the game. I don't care if we're playing in the street kickball. We're going to win. So Antonio Pierce, a guy to look at here, new offensive coordinator there, and Luke Getsy.
And they played like it to the players down the stretch when he took over last year, too. Let's not forget that. I still won't forget that big upset against KC around the holidays.
Yeah, former player who can relate to players, and his intensity level is off the charts. Head coach tracking record. I mean, everybody in the world, the $2 better to the $2 million better knows about John Harbaugh in the preseason. It's been tremendous. Sean McDermott for Buffalo, another guy who's been pretty good as far as coverage spreads. As far as individual games, I'm with you on this Detroit Giants over, and I was kind of surprised that it came down to 34.5. Brian Dable is 6-0 over the total in preseason. And it makes sense. He's an offensive mind, and the Giants this season are a team trying to create offense. I mean, 2/3 of their big moves were offensive moves. Let's build our lineup. Let's get more weapons. Let's go. We're going to stick at quarterback, and we won't see but the backup quarterbacks here. But even if you're looking at Drew Lock and Tommy DeVito, those guys can move the football.
Starting experience. Yes, both of them. Tommy Cutlets. Why not?
Gotta like Tommy Cutlets in the preseason, right? And the Lions, for what it's worth, quality depth.
Nate Sudfeld's been there forever. He's experienced, knows the system, right?
Another guy who can read defenses, has been around the block. So the one thing I do love in preseason, and when you're playing behind these backup makeshift offensive lines, is the guys that are mobile.
Yeah.
And you hit on it a little bit with Cleveland, but when you look at their last two, Tyler Huntley, former backup to Lamar Jackson at the Ravens, and Dorian Thompson-Robinson, who we saw last year create points and big plays in preseason games. Yes. Boy, that's the one mismatch in preseason to me where quarterbacks are concerned this week, Ian, is the Cleveland-Green Bay game. Because when you go to the Green Bay depth chart and you see Sean Clifford from Penn State, Michael Pratt, rookie out of Tulane, and Jacob Eason, none of those thrill me as far as moving the team towards the end of the game. So I think Cleveland as a side could be really good. Second half, they should be on their terms. I think the Detroit Giants game should get over the number. The one thing I'm really interested in is the new kickoff rule. Now, I bet UFL, I handicap UFL, so I've seen the new kickoff rule in action. We saw it last week, right? Chicago, Houston had 38 points immediately.
All I will say about it, Rob, is I'm going to need time to warm up to it. At the moment, not crazy about it.
Yeah, it's different, right? When you look at it, and I was saying this actually to my dad. I said, when you watch it, you're going to say, what in God's name is that? I've never seen that before. But what it does is it starts every drive on short fields. And either you score off of that drive or you punt deep into the other team's territory. And if you can get a 3 and out, you get good field position right back. So it kind of enhances offense and point production opportunities. And I think in preseason where you mentioned the numbers 25-8, I think you said, to the over the last 2 years.
25-8. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting to note, Ian, if whether that's an effect of the 3-game preseason. We'll wait and see. But I do think it's an effect of these odds makers just not really ever adjusting preseason lines for 40 years. You look up and you're going to see the same totals.
Mid-30s,
right?
high 30s, right?
Yeah, that's all right. Pick a number between 33 and 36, and there's your total, basically. Yeah. So I think overs are in play here. But two that I did bet and that I do like already, the Detroit-New York game tomorrow night over that total looks low to me, 34.5. And I do think Cleveland probably wins by a touchdown. This hike in the New England game from 1.5 to 7, I mean, you can't play that anymore. You can't go laying 7 in the preseason game.
I don't know if I can take Carolina, Rob, even getting 7 with Jack Plummer going to be most of this game, unsigned free agent. And then I think after that, it's dubious too for Carolina at the quarterback spot. I'll say this, though, about Canales here. And with that team, as far as the regular season goes, Rob, I think they're going to be better than people think. I really do. Because that division is not great. It's not good at all. I have questions about Atlanta because people love Atlanta. And on paper, I think, you could make a case for the team to beat. But I don't like the Raheem Morris hire. This has Dennis Allen, another coach in that division, written all over it. What has he done as a head coach? It hasn't been great for Raheem Morris. I'm not a Dennis Allen fan. Dennis Allen's 24-46 as an NFL head coach. 24-46 with the Raiders and the Saints combined. We know Derek Carr checked down Charlie and a defense that, I'm not overly, I think it's a little overrated. The Saints I'm not high on. Atlanta, to me, still has questions on defense. And can Cousins and stay healthy for a year? And then you got Tampa Bay that I think comes back to the pack a little bit this year. I'm not saying Carolina was horrible last year, and their O-line is terrible last year. I get that. But I want to throw out Canales can salvage something with Bryce Young, and here's why. He was with Geno in Seattle a few years ago, and Geno had a hell of a year. Canales was on that staff, Carroll's staff on the offensive side with Geno Smith in Seattle. When Geno really shocked everybody when he first got that start in Seattle. I'm like, whoa, he's actually playing pretty good. This is Geno Smith. What's happening here? I think Dave Canales was happening with that a little bit. And of course, we know what happened last year with Baker Mayfield. Best year in the NFL by far. Oh, yeah, with Dave Canales helping him out on that offensive side with Tampa on that coaching staff as the OC. So don't rule out the possibility that Dave Canales pulls something out of Bryce Young that obviously we didn't see last year.
They're more talented. And if you look at their season over under win total, Ian, you ask that team to go 6-11 and cash an over ticket. They can go 6-11 in that division. To your point, they're not that far removed from what Tampa Bay is right now, from what New Orleans is right now, from what the Atlanta Falcons are right now. So, yeah, I mean, if they can put it together quick, he's an offensive whiz, Dave Canales. So we'll see. They could be a long-term future bet as well. I'm just not in the habit of laying 7 in a preseason game. And both of those guys that are coaching against one another, as I mentioned earlier, they're first-time head coaches. So I think they'll both be looking to at least lay some kind of format out for a culture there. We'll see how it turns out. But if you got in early and you're on New England, congratulations. Closing line value on your side. It doesn't always work out, but it might this time.
It might, but not at this number. Even with and I get it. Bailey Zappi's on that quarterback rotation. He started a bunch of games for New England. I know the reasons why people would be liking New England, but there's no way in the preseason am I laying a number of this size. 6.5, 7 points.
Especially Ian, real quick. Especially when your head coach has already made his game plan public and said we're going to run the football. Yep. We're going to run heavy. That's all. We're going to block. We're not going to game plan. It's all fundamentals. We're going to run the football.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. I think you know what, by kickoff, pizza money is going to land on Carolina for yours truly at 7. I think Jake Luton is going to get some time though in the second half too, and Jake Luton's experienced. He's been around the block, former Oregon State, quarterback back in the day. So, like I said, maybe Plummer worries me. I will say that Jack Plummer.
He should.
Here. Yeah, he should. But and you're going to see a lot of him. The lion's share of the game is going to be him for Carolina.
He worried Jeff Brahmy, and he worried him badly.
And Jeff Brom's a quarterback guy, so from that standpoint, that Jack Plummer, and it never really had that incremental leap under his tutelage. Yeah, it's a concern. It's a problem. All right, we wrap up the show. 5 minutes or so. We'll wrap it up. NFL and college football futures. I'm going to throw an under the radar one at you from Conference USA. And if you read the win totals report that I released for the members at Dub Club and SoBet, I like this one. I'm going to go with the Sam Houston State Bearcats over 4.5 wins this year. This is Casey Keeler, who's had a tremendous run there as the head coach. And I remember last year in games where their offense was pathetic. It was pitiful. It was embarrassing at times how Sam Houston State moved the football on offense. Keegan Shoemaker, and it just wasn't working. I think Keegan Shoemaker would have had more success in a career as a literal shoemaker, quite honestly, than being quarterback the way he played early in the season. But that offense got better later in the season, and they kind of flipped. They transformed. They were all defense, no offense early. And then as the season went on, their offense started to move the ball, put up some points, and their defense kind of regressed a little bit. And I know I did cash some overs. And more importantly, Sam Houston State was more competitive later in the season. I still won't forget that they went to Liberty, the king of the conference last year, and nearly beat them. Huge underdogs. They were getting 3 touchdowns or so in that game, and they get stopped in the red zone late in the fourth quarter, and they were driving to win that game. So to me, there's things to like. A lot of returning experience back, good coach, a conference that is probably the weakest group of 5 conference in college football. I would say question marks with a lot of teams in and around them. There's this middle of the pack in the conference this year where there's so many teams. Like, I'm not sold on Derek Mason at Middle Tennessee. I'm not sold on a lot of the mid-range teams in that conference. But you give me a team that was ultra competitive in a lot of games back half of last year, an offense that figured it out a little bit, returning production back, defense showed to be capable. You gave the best team in the conference by far a big-time scare. And we're asking this team, I think the schedule's manageable. I think we're asking them to get 5 wins, be 5-7 minimum. I think Sam Houston State can do it. So there's one I like in college. How about a college football win total, Rob, that you like?
The first one I bet and doesn't exist anymore was UCLA under 5.5 wins. I think it's pushed down to the best you can get now is 5. There are some 4.5s out there, but plenty of reasons why.
Sean Foster,
obviously,
wow.
The press conference was a disaster.
Yeah.
But the scheduling, Ian, just real quick again, and I know it's going to be difficult. Obviously, Big Ten, UC, and Pac-12 combined. You got a lot of West-East travel, but theirs is especially brutal. You're talking about a game. They're going to play at LSU. They're going to come back home and play Oregon. Going to lose both of those. Then they're going to have to go from home to play at Happy Valley. And then they're going to come back home and play Minnesota and PJ Fleck, row the boat. Not going to be easy, probably lose. Leave LA again to go all the way to Piscataway and play the Rutgers Scarlet Knights. Probably trouble there. Go from there to Nebraska. I mean, their schedule is just a disaster. And then I just cap it off with this. Their starting quarterback, Ethan Garbers. Here's his quote. We've gone from a team with a couple of word plays to a system with 10 to 15 word plays right now. The immediacy of that clicking is not week 1, week 2, week. It's next year.
By the time they get this team Chinese or something?
Yeah, so I don't know that. Eric Bieniemy's the OC, right? He probably brought an NFL playbook with him. And in college, the way systems are now, that just doesn't work with these kids. You know, they don't come up learning intricate play calls. So I'm going to give you that one. But since it's not available anymore, I'll give you one more Pac-12 team that I think is staying under, and that's the Washington Huskies, 7.5 total. Their schedule not as brutal as UCLA's, but still somewhat tough on the travel. Same exact reason. Jed Fish, yeah, he brought Arizona to great heights last year, but it takes time in the Jed Fish system. All you got to do is go back in his college career. When he coached Minnesota, they couldn't figure it out. He got fired. He got a job at Miami of Florida as the OC. They stunk. He lost that job. Coached at Michigan, not good there either. It takes time because of these intricate NFL systems. Just like we were talking about with Bieniemy, it's the same thing with Jed Fish. And now you have no pieces. I mean, all the talent went to the NFL, right? Your quarterback's gone, your receivers are gone, everybody's gone, your defense is gone. They have so little returning experience on this team. So I get that they might have been a little bit stacked depth-wise, but coming in and learning everything brand new here, I don't think correlates to winning 8 games in a Big 12 season. So for me, it's going to be UCLA under, Washington under. I think both of those. And real quick to your point about Sam Houston State, that team in the FCS was an offensive juggernaut. And it was a surprise to me that Casey Keeler, who, at the University of Delaware, which is about 20 minutes from my home here in southeastern Pennsylvania, always an offensive mind. And it didn't work in the beginning, but it's working now. So I like that play. So Sam Houston State could very well surprise. Last year, a little bit of a learning experience moving up to D1 or FBS, as it's called.
Year 2 now. Yep.
Yeah, and maybe in a softened up conference, get the job done this year. He's a good coach.
He is. And I thought 4.5 looked a little light. Per team, I think they could even make a bowl game, quite honestly. It wouldn't even surprise me if they get to 6, but all we need is 5. Out of that win total in order to hit it. I want to throw out a couple futures too, like not just the win totals, but a couple futures. And I always like this because I think in college football now, a little more parity, a little more wide open, 12-team playoff now for the first time, which I'm very, very excited about. There's certainly opportunities, and there's certainly a chance for maybe some surprises as far as conference winners. So a couple of, value conference futures that I'm kind of looking at this year. In college football. I mentioned Sam Houston State. Look, Liberty's probably going to win that conference. It's probably theirs for sure, but 22-1, that's the one that I thought a longer shot in that conference. Sam Houston State, and anything can happen kind of deal. I do like Oregon to beat Ohio State in the Big Ten, plus 200. I do like Gabriel being there. I like the Ohio State defense is really good. Do have questions still a little bit on that offensive side. And I know the SEC, and Bowling Green, by the way, in the MAC, I think is a live future as well. With Leffler there, with Connor Bazelak, an ultra-experienced quarterback going back to Missouri years ago. Bowling Green beat Georgia Tech last year in that huge upset, competitive. I think in a couple of their other non-conference games too, if I'm not mistaken. Bowling Green in the MAC is a good one. I think them and Miami O are probably the teams that battle it out. I'm not as high on Toledo this year. I think the Michigan directional schools still have issues. I think Akron's still just Akron. I guess that's the best way to put it with them. So I think there's opportunity there. And in the SEC, Rob, maybe it's just because I love the coach so much and what he's done the last few years, because I know Alabama and Georgia in this conference are capable. And we know Ole Miss has a very good team. And you can never count out LSU if they can play a lick of defense this year. And I think Nussmeier knows the system very well. So the offense, even losing Jaden Daniels, should still be fine because Nussmeier's capable. I get all those teams could win the SEC. I totally get it. And I know this team's coming off a down year and they fired their coach after it. But I believe in Mike Elko. I think this guy is incredible. I think this guy is absolutely incredible for what he did at Duke. Duke was just in a disastrous way when, the end of the Cutcliffe era came around. He had to pick it up, resurrect it, and he almost did it right away. Year one, it was unbelievable what he was getting from that Duke Blue Devils team. And then the second year was good. And, of course, last year he ran into trouble with the Riley Leonard injury, and then that's when the season kind of fell apart a little bit for Duke. But he did an incredible job at Duke. Duke looked like a football program that had gone right back in the sewer again, and he picked them up and he raised them up again. And I know it's a brutally tough SEC, and you got Texas and Oklahoma there now. Not going to make it any easier. But I like A&M to a longer shot here to win that conference at 15-1, which I was able to get at Bet365, plus 260 to make the college football playoff, which I think they're capable of. Keep in mind they now have a healthy Connor Wegman, who I think I saw enough good things from him at the quarterback spot before his injury took place. A defense that should be very good, and more importantly, a coach that I trust him a ton. Let's put it that way. So everything A&M for me, Rob, in the SEC. I got a little on the win total over, a little to win the SEC as a dark horse. To make the playoff is something I thought was a really juicy price at plus 260. National championship may be stretching it, but we did put a couple bucks on that. But especially to make the playoff and the win total over. I think A&M's capable. I really do. And I'm an Elko believer.
It's certainly on paper. And what Elko does so well, Ian, and what you need so well, and he steps into it now. He didn't have it at Duke, hasn't really had it in the past, is rotational trench play. He builds offensive and defensive lines. And when you can run 8 or 9 quality guys in and out, that's to his benefit for sure. And Connor Wegman, I'll second you on that because he's a guy right now that if you look at, and it's so preliminary, so early, and these things change so drastically by the time it comes. But Connor Wegman is listed as like the 9th quarterback off the board in the NFL draft next year. And if he's the 9th quarterback off the board, then either there's an injury concern or in 32 years of doing this professionally, I just don't know what I'm watching because he's much better than the 9th available quarterback next year. He's a thrower of the football. Elko will find a way to use him. So, hey, it's a crowded SEC, right? You could pick one of a bunch of teams and get yourself there. We'll see. I'll tell you the one I like, the one I'm enamored with, and the one that I think is going to rule their conference from here on out. I hope it happens this year right off the bat, but that's SMU to win the ACC. SMU's maybe 14 to 18 to 1. You find your way. But the way things are run now with this NIL, I mean, for anybody who hasn't seen it, just go back and watch Pony Excess, the 30 for 30 special. And SMU is about 40 years ahead of their time because now they have the resources to put together the best team. There's no question. First of all, Preston Stone might be the best quarterback in that conference, arguably. I mean, it's all a matter of opinion, subjective for sure. But Preston Stone, fantastic quarterback. And the reports that you get out of SMU this summer and the way they're playing defense, which has always been a concern, but that defense came around last year, albeit in a weak AAC. Boy, if they play any defense, look out Clemson, look out FSU, look out Miami. I know you're all better right now. But as the season progresses, I'm not so sure that as a long shot, SMU isn't worth a chance at 16 to 1 to win that conference. So that's where I'm at. If I was to pick one that is kind of an under the radar dark horse type team. And then from here on out, next year, the year after, as they just continue to pile up athletes with NIL money and free automobiles, whatever else they have to give, they have the resources to give. They're going to be a force to be reckoned with in that league. And maybe Clemson and FSU want to get out of there and go play SEC. Not that it's weaker competition there, but just go get out. Because I think SMU is going to rule. They're probably already ahead of North Carolina State, and all the other teams of that ilk that are in there.
No doubt. Couple overreactions here for me as far as one game in the most disappointing game for me in college football, the first week 0, week 1 schedule that they're playing each other. because I want to fade both of them. That Miami, Florida game, that Hurricanes Gators game. I'm so disappointed they're playing each other. I can't make a case for either. I don't want much to do with the Gators and Billy Napier on the hot seat. And I know they've got the talent, Miami, and Cristobal's done he's got the recruits there. He's got the athletes. He's got the brought in Cam Reward. I get all that. But if anyone can screw it up, it's Mario Cristobal. And so that's so disappointing. Of all the games, it's like, why do those teams have to be facing each other in the first game of the season? That's the one for me, Miami, Florida.
Yeah. I won't argue on the Mario Cristobal thing. I mean, it seemed like he was on his way to greatness at Florida International. It turned out to be the exact opposite. The guy's imploded as a head coach. So we'll see. I think the most intriguing game of all, obviously, it's big names, but LSU USC is going to be a big deal because you're both talking about replacing top 5 quarterbacks.
That game's still going over the total, in my opinion. I truly think so. I believe in Miller Moss. I've got to see it from the LSU defense. Hell, I got to see it from the USC defense that they're even a little bit better. And Nussmeier knows that system. Indoors at Allegiant in Las Vegas, I'll still be on that over. I know, I get it. Jaden Daniels gone. Caleb Williams gone. I get it on both sides. I think the offenses are still good, and those defenses are still questionable until I see something better.
Well, and to that point, because we talked about it in the Canadian Football League game where we think that Dolagala can throw against an Edmonton defense. Both of those teams have new DCs and they're working in new systems. The talent's there, but to learn the system is another thing. And to learn it against these caliber of offenses, Nussmeier, to your point, is the guy. I mean, there's some that think Nussmeier might put up better numbers than Jaden Daniels. It won't be because of his legs, but through the air, he may put up better numbers. LSU's never going to hurt for receivers, so the core is going to be good, and the running game is going to be good. We'll see which team can get to the defense fastest. I think it'll probably be LSU. USC stole UCLA's defensive coordinator to try and get better here. Lincoln Riley needs something, Ian, because you talk about hot seats. This guy's a big name who's really proven nothing yet. So we're going to find out if he can actually lead USC to anything. But that's an intriguing game. We'll see. What did we see last year? LSU played Florida State opening week 0. Was that right? And Florida State wound up with Jordan Travis. They won that game.
Yep, they did. So to me, that's more a totals game for me than side when it comes to LSU and USC. Like I said, I think that game could go over. All right, one NFL future win total or future that you like in the NFL.
Well, I did this, Ian. Specifically, I went into this when I made these plays to try and buck the Houston Texans. Not that they're not great on paper, not that they haven't improved on paper, but just that second year. Can they run that back? I'm not so sure. They're like a CJ Stroud injury away from being last place in that division. So we know how the quarterback injuries are in the NFL. I like the Indianapolis Colts. I played their win total over 8.5.
I'm with you there.
Like 5 cents juice.
Yep.
Now, it hurts today. Josh Downs suffers an ankle injury in practice, but I think he'll be okay 3-4 weeks from now. But there's a little bit of a belief in Shane Steichen here and what he has to work with. Shane Steichen obviously was Jalen Hurts' OC when Jalen Hurts was Jalen Hurts. And now he's got Anthony Richardson back, and this arsenal has just gotten better. You know, it was wide receiver poor last year, but it's become pretty explosive with the acquisitions. And the whole AFC South has actually gotten better. I can make the case for Jacksonville and Tennessee as well. I just don't trust Will Levis on Tennessee. But for me, if you give Steichen the dual quarterback, and we saw Anthony Richards start to do Lamar Jackson type things before he got hurt last year. So he's healthy now. I think that'll be good. He's got an offensive line that still ranks, at least if you look at some of these internet websites that do these types of things, they rank as a top 5 offensive line still. Jonathan Taylor running the football. So the offensive balance is there. It's a defensive coordinator's nightmare, actually, to have to defend Richardson, Taylor, and the passing game all at once. I think the big, and they did draft A.D. Mitchell out of Texas as another wide receiving threat here. But despite all their assets, because their defensive line is highly rated this year, they've got an extreme pass rush. The weakness on this team, I'll zero right in on that, is the pass secondary, which is, it's hard. It's going to be hard against Houston. It's going to be hard against Trevor Lawrence. It's going to be hard against anybody. But if the pass pressure can get there, which they have in excess of, it covers things up on the defensive side, and perhaps the secondary can get better as they go along. You're asking this team to go 9-8 in a division where 9-8 is really doable. This is not the AFC North by any means. And again, I think if you're forced into quarterback injury here, that Indianapolis stands the best of all of these teams, because I don't know what Houston does without Stroud. I don't know what Jacksonville does without Lawrence, and Tennessee. Maybe Tennessee's better off without Levis. Who knows? But I think that this is a team that'll score a bunch of points. I have them earmarked for maybe 28, 29 a game, and that may be enough to outscore a bunch of teams where they can't play good defense. The schedule is not tremendously tough for Indianapolis this year. So I'm going to say second year of Shane Steichen with the Indianapolis Colts. They just look much, much better to me on paper. I think they go over 8.5 wins. And the fact that you don't even have to lay 10 cents with that is kind of incredible to me. But that's a tribute to the bandwagon that is the Houston Texans.
Yeah, it's Houston. It's Trevor Lawrence and Jacksonville. I'm sure people will jump on a bounce back for Doug Peterson, Trevor Lawrence, and Jacksonville, because that was a playoff team 2 years ago and a disheartening end of the season. They could have made the playoffs, and they had that just unfathomable loss to Tennessee right at the end of the season there that kept them out. So that opens the door for a team like Indianapolis. I'll throw one win total out there. I mean, I already mentioned Carolina. I am on over 5.5 wins with them. I'm on the Rams as well, over 8. I'm just asking them to get 9-8 with what we saw last year. Please just give me a full year of Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp healthy, and Stafford not having an injury setback. And I think they can definitely be a 9-win team. And then, of course, you've got the to me, there's still too many questions with the Bears. I don't know how much Sam Darnold impact is going to work with Minnesota. He's going to be the starter. We're not going to see McCarthy anytime soon. And I know O'Connell works well with quarterbacks, but is that going to work right away? Can that defense improve? Because that Minnesota defense wasn't very good. Really, the last couple of years, they've had issues on defense. And then Green Bay. Is it first half of the season Green Bay or second half of the season Green Bay? So, and I know at 10.5, I don't always love going over a win total of that number, but I'm doing it with Detroit. I think they play a lot of indoor games. That's huge, right, Rob? A lot of indoor games, because the one quibble about Detroit and Goff and the offense is you get them on grass, you get them in the mud, you get them in rain and outdoor when weather conditions. They're not nearly as good, and they have had some issues and struggles at times, but they play so many indoor dome stadiums this year. Of course, their own stadium is a dome stadium, Ford Field. You talk about offensive lines like Indy that are good. Detroit's got to be top 1, 2, or 3 offensive line in the NFL when they're healthy, with Sewell and Decker, with Ragnow, the center. It is just an incredible offensive line, loaded at that position, ability to open up holes for Montgomery and Gibbs, Thunder and Lightning, running back duo, ability to pass protect now for Goff, which he needs. There are some changes at wide receiver after Amon-Ra St. Brown, but I think they can find weapons. Jamison Williams could have a breakout year, the kid out of Alabama, to be better. The defense, I think they really improved in the secondary. And I'll tell you what really helped. They're going to get a pass rush. I think they improved the D-line. The linebacking core is the one area, but let's see what Campbell brings them, Jack Campbell and company there. And more importantly, when it was looking like they might lose Ben Johnson, this just phenomenal OC, because he was hot on the heels of maybe a head coaching position elsewhere in the offseason. But somehow it fell through, whatever the case may be, and Ben Johnson's back as the OC here for Detroit. That is huge, because to say this guy's offensive game planning and scheming and play calling and adjustments during a game was good was an understatement. Unbelievable job he did last year. So him being still the OC, huge for Detroit. And I just don't know if the other teams have closed the gap on them in the NFC North.
Well, and again, I mean, I have a whole page of notes here because I bet it, but I played the Lions, but I played them to win the North at the plus price, plus $1.40 for a lot of the reasons.
Oh yeah, I've got that too. Yep.
The most obvious one for me is they're just better across the trenches than Green Bay. They're a better offensive line, as you mentioned. Not that Green Bay's bad. Detroit's just elite offensive line. And when they added Marcus Davenport to give Aiden Hutchinson a little help, bookend help here, and then throw DJ Reader in the middle to stuff the run, they're already a number 2 run defense. And then the secondary, which was the problem. How about Amik Robertson, Carlton Davis, and then go ahead and draft Terry and Arnold out of Alabama and get Enos Rakestraw when they did second
Yep.
round out of Missouri. That secondary is going to improve immensely in my estimation. And as we said,
And this general manager, Brad Holmes, deserves his flowers too. Has he been
I'm
something or
telling you,
what?
the combo of him and Dan Campbell molding it all together. And we mentioned it when we talked about Lions Giants over. Detroit's built depth in this league, and you got to win with depth. God forbid Jared Goff gets hurt. They go to Hendon Hooker, who apparently is having a really good camp. The other side, Jordan Love gets hurt. And guess what? I saw enough of Sean Clifford at Penn State to know that they're not going anywhere with Sean Clifford. So to me, there's noticeable differences between them all. And again, much like the Houston Texans, to your point, Green Bay, I mean, it was like a 6-game flash at the end of the year. Is it going to carry over? I'm not so sure. The DCs are going to be wise to Jordan Love now. And I don't know that their receiving core. Let me just add this real quick. The Lions have more home run threats on offense. You talked about Jameson Williams, but we'll add Jahmyr Gibbs and company and Khalif Raymond. They have more home run threats than Green Bay has. Green Bay's got receivers, but they don't have these guys that can go 75 yards on one play. And Dan Campbell, God bless him. Don't screw it up on me, Dan, with these fourth down decisions.
Once in a while, to kick a field goal and take 3 points. Like when you have a double-digit lead on the road against San Francisco in the NFC Championship game. That might be a nice goddamn time to kick the field goal, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Get to the Super Bowl, dude. And I also, when teams are left on the doorstep like this, Ian, they always talk about, especially in the NBA, progression. You have to get to this stage, to get to that stage, to get to that stage. Well, Detroit was just about there on its doorstep. I think that breeds motivation here. So I like Detroit to win that division as well.
Chiefs-Lions is my Super Bowl pick. I already mentioned that on a previous show. Chiefs and Lions. It's just, for me, look, someone could finally maybe get through Kansas City in the AFC. And you talk about motivation, I don't think they're sick of winning. And I truly believe this Chiefs team, top to bottom, starting with Reed and Mahomes, it would be something else. And there's a supreme motive. You don't think they want to make some NFL history and be a three-peat, 3-time in a row Super Bowl champion, which is almost impossible to pull off? You better believe they want it. You better believe they're not sick of these Super Bowl parades yet.
And you know what, Ian? Things that you and I, as sports bettors and handicappers, don't consider. I mean, we're far from the petty debate shows and who's better than. It doesn't matter to us. Give us a point spread. That's what we care about. But to your point about motivation, I saw this thing where the NFL Network did their top 100 players and voted Tyreek Hill the best player in the NFL, and Patrick Mahomes was 4. Talk about petty motivation. For a guy like that, that is petty motivation. You mean I'm not number 1 after all of this? So I can see your point, man. That team is never sick of it, and Andy Reid is a heck of a head coach. They're a well-run organization.
Spagnuolo, I mean, what he's done, obviously, on the defensive side as coordinator. So it goes without saying, Kansas City is still very much a threat in the AFC, especially when I got questions about Buffalo, questions about Baltimore still. Is Houston going to be as good? Can they run it back, as you said? All these other AFC contenders, have they done enough? Will they do enough to dethrone Kansas City? Ends up being the huge question coming into this season, but it's going to be fun to watch. And Patrick Mahomes, number 4. That's why I don't take that. That's why I don't spend a second of my summer, and I don't get a lot of time off, and neither do you, watching that stupid waste of time top 100 NFL players on NFL Network. I couldn't give a shit. Sorry. Yeah.
It's so funny because my son will try to draw me into those arguments. I'm like, dude, don't do it because they don't mean a thing. I said, just wake me up when something's decided. Otherwise, don't talk to me about that stuff because it's all opinion and none of it's, some people will speak their opinion as if it's fact. It's not. And Patrick Mahomes to be number 4, just my opinion, he's the best player in the NFL right now. I think he's proven that.
No doubt. And that's just another thing to fire him up, and make him want to play even better and play even harder when he's got the NFL Network talking about him as a number 4 quarterback in the league after already, back-to-back Super Bowls that he's won, 3 in his career. And you look at it already, too, that And then you've got the Las Vegas Raiders poking the bear with a Kermit the Frog doll
Yeah.
in training camp just to fire him up even more and talking smack. And it's a rookie of all people doing it on that Raiders team. How stupid can you be? I mean, seriously.
Jim Harbaugh hasn't done anything yet, and he might be the biggest danger to him. We don't know what Harbaugh is going to bring inside the division. That's the unknown right now with the Chargers, but you're right.
So let me throw something out before we wrap up about the Chargers, because I bet him over. I believe in Harbaugh, but man, I'm worried about this Herbert thing here in the preseason a little bit with this injury. And, you know, they say he's going to be ready for week 1. I don't know if I fully buy into that. And obviously that's a grave concern for the Chargers if he's not ready to go. But I did like them over that win total. And I believe, and you talk about just from a pure coaching standpoint, say what you will about the transgressions at Michigan, what he did or didn't do to fudge the rules. But you compare Harbaugh to the clown shows of Anthony Lynn and Brandon Staley. Yeah. My goodness, a huge upgrade, as much as you could think of.
Yeah, and that poor team, for what it's worth, just gets snake bit by injury year after year. And it's always cluster with them. It's either cluster on the offensive line, cluster on the defensive line. Joey Bosa and company can't stay healthy. Cluster in the defensive secondary. Harbaugh is going to bring a different brand of football to them. You know what? Like I say, they're the unknown. They could very well make a quick rise because they're talented enough. There's a lot of players on that team on paper. And hopefully Herbert is okay, because I think that guy gets a bad rap. Again, just my personal opinion, but I think he's better than a lot think he is. And we're going to find out. Certainly when KC meets the Chargers first time around, we'll see what Jim Harbaugh brings.
And a manageable schedule should help the LA Chargers this year as well. Their schedule is not bad at all, which should help their cause at least to get to that 9-win plateau. Rob, we went longer. I figured we would, but great stuff. Great. We hit everything, a little NFL, a little college football, and, of course, our CFL Week 10 preview. So we'll wrap it up with best bets, as we always do at the end of the show. It can really be anything. I know you can pick something from CFL Week 10. It could be one of the win totals or futures that you like in NFL or college football, or a Week 1 preseason game even. The door is open. The cupboard is open for whatever you want to go with, Rob, for best bet. So have at it. What do you like for best bet?
Well, this way, we don't have to rehash any analysis here, Ian. I think the one that stands out to me the most is the one we talked about where the CFL is concerned, the BC Lions, Edmonton Elks, up and over that total of 49. I think we're getting a real good price, a real fair price on a game that should find its way to the mid-50s. A little bit of, inconsistency in the line here, maybe too much shaved off by odds makers. So for me, it'll be the BC Edmonton game up and over 49 is the best bet.
And that will be on my card and my ticket this week as well in the CFL. BC Edmonton over 49 best bet for Rob Vino. I will go with a CFL best bet too, and it's actually going to be a team I cashed with in a home game just 2 weeks ago. Lucky as shit against Winnipeg to cash it, because Winnipeg did everything they could to lose it, and they did more than Toronto did to win it. But Toronto still won in overtime, and I think Toronto gets the job done here in a revenging situation against Calgary at home, a winless Calgary team on the road. So Argo's money line, you can get it at around minus 115 or so right now. That is going to be my best bet here for this edition of Ian Cameron's Football Frenzy. Rob, it's been a blast. We'll have to do this again.
Yeah, thanks for having me, buddy. We covered a lot of ground, but I'm glad you give me the freedom to speak a little bit here as we try to dissect these things. At least your audience knows that we're pretty firm behind what we believe in here. So hopefully we cash tickets. That's the bottom line. Hopefully we've helped your audience cash a few themselves.
Hey, just don't accuse us of lacking depth of analysis. I don't think that's possible with the two of us. You can never, ever say that about me and Rob Vino. That is for sure. And by the way, check out Rob Vino at Wager Talk. His subscription options, of course, mine are at SoBet and Dub Club. Dub Club is where you get the full card for the high volume players. If you want a little something lower volume, just best bets only, you can find that at SoBet for me. So make sure you check that out as well. Great stuff. Hit the like button. Those of you tuning into the show, for Rob Vino, I'm Ian Cameron. Have a great week. Enjoy CFL Week 10. Enjoy the first week of the NFL preseason as well. And good luck. And we will be back with you next week for another edition of Ian Cameron's Football Frenzy.